Chapter 15. The Southern Highway. After returning home for a quick bath and a proper meal, Caleb returned at long last to his quarters in the castle, which had remained virtually untouched since he had returned from Grimhall. Though it had been just shy of a week, it felt more like ages as he opened the large armoire to retrieve a new set of clothing, just one of the luxuries of having a royal station. He outfitted himself with a fine stitched long-sleeved shirt with a high collar, lined with decorative royal patterns but warm and ideal for traveling. A leather jerkin went over the top, and he replaced his old boots with a newer pair, not a year old yet, that had been made for him to wear to battle. He took a long look at the set of armor sitting on its stand, considering it from horn-tipped helm to iron foot, but only selected the gauntlets for his wrists, as the rest would be more of a burden than a boon on their hasty ride. Lastly, he threw his field cloak over the top and tied it securely about his neck, and set off to fetch horses from the stables and find provisions for their saddlebags. The day passed away quickly, sinking into the last quarter before Caleb arrived at the gates of the Starlehand homestead. 3 servants from the castle followed him, each walking a mount by the reins while Caleb walked his own horse Vector. He had received Vector some 3 years back from King Hallas as an honorary present in the name of his father, Damon. Vector was a strong, fast steed in his prime, golden brown with a black mane and tail. The horses had all been fed, groomed and newly shoed for the road, and each toted saddlebags filled with fruits, bread and cheeses, dried meats beautifully wrapped by the royal chefs, and tinder boxes amongst other things. He knew Layla would be taking her horse, Ollie, and he had brought an extra pack for her. The gates were opened, and as soon as Caleb was able to secure the steeds in the Starlehand stable, he dismissed the servants and made his way down the stone path through the property past the 3-story house toward the forge. When he arrived, the falling sun touched the very tip of the Titan Mountains, ready to retire for the night within the hour. As he passed under the arched gateway in the wall around the forge structure, he saw Anselm sitting on a large barrel and writing in his records, leaning in close to see in the fading light. He was still wearing the high-necked, ornate robes of a warden, although Caleb could tell he had also changed into a different set. His satchel was about his waist, and he too wore a sturdy field cloak on his back. He was ready to ride but looked largely the same, consistent as ever Anselm was. He looked up as Caleb came close. "Where is everyone else?" he asked with slight impatience. "They should all be along soon," Anselm responded, snapping the covers of his book shut and returning it to its place at his side. "Layla is inside helping her brothers and saying her goodbyes. Sounds like her father had a thing or two to say about all of this, but you know how they are," he added with a smirk. "He can't do a thing about it. Ella should be along soon with Leothran." "You left her with Leothran?" Caleb asked with a wary look. "I hope she hasn't given her too much trouble." "No," Anselm said. "Ella may be a fool, but she knows a formidable opponent when she sees one. She will act the part of the all-powerful sage, but will not disrupt the plan. If anything, she'll behave because it's your wish that she come with us," he added, with a sideways knowing glance at Caleb. Caleb shrugged off the comment and took a seat on the barrel next to him, pulling his cloak around himself. He glanced toward Layla's home, candle lights flickering in the windows. "I guess in times like this it's easier not having anyone to bid farewell to. My father would be the only one if he were here." "I suppose we're the lucky ones then," Anselm chuckled sarcastically, his bottled emotions becoming somewhat transparent. "You and Ella haven't seen your folks in quite some time," Caleb ventured. "Ever wonder what they're doing in Faldesia?" Anselm chuckled again, this time louder than before. "I can tell you exactly what they're doing," he said, leaning back against the stone wall behind them. "They are sitting in their shop in Paladar, stitching shoes together and treating their hired hands like oxen, whips in hand, trying with all their might to keep the gold flowing. I'm sure they don't care where we are or what we're doing." Caleb had heard the stories, but the idea of home being a place of such dark memory was a foreign concept. "It has been over 10 years since the 2 of you left for Tritus, no?" "Surely they have wondered," Caleb said. "Ever think of going back one day?" "Paladar is a long way to go just for a visit," Anselm said. "And besides, if I were to show up one day, I would be lucky to get out of there again alive. Elle and I heard they were furious at us for leaving without any word, and not out of any sentimental gesture, only because the business took a hit. There is nothing for me there. Even the traveling performers we left the city with were more like family than they had been. Caleb could read his friend all too well. Are you worried the invaders have gathered strength in Faldesia too? He asked. Anselm's face grew somber as he sat in thought, but could not answer before Elastra and Leothran approached. As would be expected, Leothran led the way while Elastra followed her, watching her back closely in case she tried anything. Leothran did not seem to mind. Elastra looked rested, wearing her warden robes in the odd fashion that she preferred with a cloak draped over the top. Leothran, however, looked entirely renewed, scanning the area as she strode with a warrior's alertness Caleb recognized at once. She had replaced his mother's tunic with a bodice vest that laced up the front over a light-colored shirt. The otherwise wide sleeves were contained with leather braces on her wrists, signifying again that she was ready to wield and use a weapon at any moment. Her riding pants were tucked into travel boots that nearly reached her knees. What really drew their eyes was her regal appearance without the bandages. Her black hair was clean and fell straight down behind her, and she had donned a new eye patch with intricate patterns sewn into it, resting over her left eye, held there by a thin band. The two men instinctively hopped off of the barrels to their feet as the women approached. What took you so long? Anselm asked his sister. I got lost, she said with irritation. But it wasn't the hexes. These fate-forsaken roads have changed since last I came this way. Anselm shook his head. It is good to see you well, Leothran, Caleb said. The eye patch suits you much better than the bandages. She smiled and nodded. Sage Elastra was able to find this for me, but it will take some time to get used to, she answered, feeling the patch. So, is everything ready? Elastra asked impatiently. Where is Layla, and where are we going to find some horses? Layla will be out soon, Anselm said. And you've forgotten again that Caleb has brought mounts for us. Even as they spoke, they all heard the back door to the house slam shut, and moments later Layla appeared through the archway of the stone wall to the forge. She had a fine blue cloak on her shoulders, and her red hair was pulled back just like she always wore it when riding. Well, that's that, she said as she joined the group. Her heart seemed a little heavy. Father and mother should be all right, attending to my brothers with the help of the maidservants. My father has offered us anything we need. They all followed her, through the tall, heavy double doors of the forgery. Torches burned throughout, with dozens of burly workers sweating and laboring furiously over bellows and anvils, hammering and grinding metal and continuing on the Starlahan business through the night, doing their part to recover from the Grimhall crisis and now the recent battle. The five of them wound their way through the narrow dirt walkways, sometimes squeezing in single file between workers or carts of metal scraps. Men smiled and bowed to Layla, and cast curious looks at the odd group following behind her. They came to a thick wooden door with a barred window at the back of the building. As they entered, Layla lit a torch and the room filled with light. It was a rather small room in comparison to the rest of the facility, almost like a large closet. With the exception of one wall of old hanging tools, the room was filled with weapons of every shape and size. Racks reaching from the floor to the ceiling housed spears and halberds that ranged from the size of a quarterstaff to twice the length of a man. Beside it rested tables and shelves filled with swords and daggers, maces and flails, bows and feathered shafts. This is where my father keeps extra stock in case of emergencies or shortages, she said. Many of these I made myself, so I can guarantee the quality, she added with pride. Anyway, we can use anything here that we need, so gear up. They all browsed the room for the next few minutes. Wanting to be ready for anything their unpredictable journey would lead them to, Caleb fastened a two-handed broadsword to his back, and a smaller arming sword to his side for dueling and mounted combat. Elastra and Anselm observed a few out of curiosity, but as wardens only fastened knives to their belts. Layla went straight to the corner where she kept her personal stash of bows she had made with her brothers. She chose a beautiful recurve bow painted green with nocks constructed of horn on the ends. Its shorter length and faster speed would be ideal for riding, and provide more powerful shots for defense against anything that could hinder them on the road. She swung a matching quiver onto her back filled with silver-tipped bolts and fixed a short sword onto the back of her belt. They all watched with a curious eye as Leothran chose her weapons. After testing the weight and balance of several, she finally secured 2 thin swords with curved blades to each side of her hip, and tied a boot knife onto her ankle. Caleb scrutinized their choices as they made final adjustments to the ties and straps of their weapons, and silently prayed his friends would not have to use them. It struck him again how odd it was to have a shapeshifter in their company. She looked as though she were marching into battle that very moment. She had said she was a warrior of high regard, and even now he was beginning to see what she meant. Only the most skilled of swordsmen could safely and efficiently wield 2 blades at once. After stopping briefly at a stone grinding wheel to have a few of their new weapons sharpened, Layla led them back out of the forgery to the stables where their mounts had been prepared. Each had been rubbed down, fed, and their saddles fastened. The hanging bags attached were filled with supplies, and blanket rolls sat on the top of their rumps. By the time the 5 of them were mounted and trotting quietly through the creaky gates of the Starlahand homestead, the sun had dipped below the horizon, and all but a smear of light behind the mountains in the west remained to allow them to see Layla's father and mother, silhouettes standing in the candle-lit doorway waving goodbye. Layla turned in her saddle and gave them a wave with a tear glinting in the corner of her eye. "Don't worry, I'll watch out for her," Caleb thought. He gave a reassuring wave as well. The journey to Shorewell would be no more than 3 days, and if all was well, Layla could be back home in less than a week. But Caleb knew as well as she did that this expedition could prove to be a dangerous one and could lead them down paths yet unknown. Nothing was certain when the advancing sweeps of a hostile nation pushed at your gates. The line of horses stalked virtually unnoticed through the streets of Tritus, southward toward the gate that would take them to the highway. The shops were closed and everyone had gone indoors for the night, with the exception of occasional patrolling soldiers and the lantern lighters. It only took a few minutes at the south gate for Caleb, Anselm, and Alastra to talk with the men on duty there, and for the gates to rasp open just wide enough for their animals to fit through. As they left the city, Caleb took a long, hard look behind him, not knowing when or if he would ever be back. The gates closed again as soon as they had all passed through, shutting out the light from the streets and windows instantly as if a thick blanket had just been thrown over their heads. All was silent, save for the heavy noises of singer-bugs. The dark road before them stretched almost in a straight line through the grassy flatlands until it vanished into the dark. Caleb took the lead at the front of the procession with Layla close behind him, followed by Alastra, then Leothran with Anselm taking up the rear. They were all abreast of the plan to keep a constant eye searching their surroundings. Despite the hasty flight of the invaders, it was still very likely that some of them could have remained behind to scout and bring word of any approaching retaliation. Caleb assumed that such a strategy would be procedure, but something inside told him there were no such scouts and that the Talgathians were running to Shorewell with all of their strength. But for what? "Father, wait for me. Fate keep you in his hands until I arrive." The smooth plains of Avondale kept the city in sight for the first few hours of their march, and they followed the dirt trail that led them south until the path was slowly overcome by grey brush, then disappeared entirely, blending into the tall blades of grass swaying in the gentle night breeze. A mile or so further, and they would be on the great highway south. Caleb knew the area all too well, of course, as he had done innumerable sweeps across it over the years as a trooper as well as a captain, most especially on raids during the Gruul Wars near the beginning of his service. Far to their left, the shores of the Fourth Sea marked the borders of Avondale, and to their right, the Titan Mountains in the west stretched southward like a massive finger pointing to their destination, the neighboring kingdom of Manon. As they went further from the city, dark patches of trees started to sprout around them, sparse at first, but in the distance they could see the larger dark shapes of the forests that dominated the otherwise empty fields of Avondale. The 5 travelers rode silently, all buried in their own thoughts and keeping a careful watch for the first hours of the march, but before long Layla dropped back and began whispering with Leothran. At length Anselm broke in. "We've got nothing to fear if we are met by any roaming enemies," he blurted out to no one in particular. "I would almost feel sympathy for them stumbling upon 2 wardens, a master swordsman, an archer and a dragon." "Ha!" Caleb turned in his saddle and saw the look on Anselm's face in the moonlight, the look of wishing to re-swallow his words, unsure if they would be a source of offense to their new companion. Alastra seemed amused at the comment. The rest of the party held a strained silence. Leothran gazed solemnly at the ground, watching the grass strands brush her boots. "That is, if you don't mind me saying so, Leothran." "I'm sorry, it's just I never thought I would fight with the satyr who could transform into anything," he choked out in a poor attempt to recover himself. "No. It's all right. I would be honored to use my abilities to repay my debt after what I have done. It's just," she closed her eye and took a deep breath, "I am uncertain I will be able to change my form." Fate first bestowed the power of the satyr to Lavelle Mayar, a woman who dwelled in the heartland during the First War of Mankind. Since that time my people have acquired our alternate shapes by studying the emanations of life forms, which only our eyes can perceive. But the binding of the Seer Tarn is a strong and evil hex. When the black-hearted sage of Talgarth cursed me with the Seer Tarn, he tore away my ability to see these emanations forever. The words came slowly as she spoke, riddled with anguish. She swallowed hard and continued. "I am no longer tied to the Seer Tarn, but a dragon now remains the only shape I can ever take so long as I live." "Well, at least it is a useful form. Better than a mouse, no?" Anselm attempted humor, but Leothran did not even smile. Caleb had not seen Anselm act this way, bumbling over his words and trying so hard to comfort a stranger. "That is the very reason I will not be much help in this regard, Sir Anselm. Changing shape requires a great deal of strength and focus. Only after much training and preparation can one take such a shape. The greater the shape you see, the more difficult it is to maintain. Some have been known to perish from remaining in an alternate shape for too long." She shook her head. "Talgarth has been deciding when I change, and it has taken all of the strength that I possess to keep pace with their greed." "I see," Anselm said. "So you feel it would be dangerous if you changed?" "I do not know for certain," Leothran replied. "The Seer Tarn and the power of that corrupt hex are great, and I am unfamiliar with all of its effects. But I feel a change within me, a feebleness of soul that fills me with doubt. I am a ruined existence." Everyone soaked in the gloomy silence but Elastra. "I suspect a hex that powerful was a third degree," she said matter-of-factly. "Calling upon the power of Mythos, chiefest of the corrupt deities." Caleb guessed the tactless comment was deliberate. "That is awful," Layla mumbled. "You need not worry. We do not intend to use you like those evil men have. We are happy to have you along, and your skills with those weapons will be help enough if it comes to that. And perhaps you can forever be free of this hex if the circlet itself is destroyed." "And anyway," Elastra said, "even a warden mark knows that anyone who undergoes major healing should still be cautious. Besides, we wouldn't want to draw any extra attention to ourselves. All of Avondale would march against us if they knew we were traveling with the beast that Talgarth drove." "Ella?" Anselm snapped. Leothran dismissed it with a shake of her head. "It is all right. Thank you all. I vow to help any way that I can." Eventually Caleb kicked Vector into a quicker trot. The relatively level ground of Avondale allowed the animals to move faster and travel farther before needing to rest, and Caleb wanted to gain ground on their flight while they could. They rode on for hours more, and when the night had crossed its peak just as the second watch was coming to an end, Caleb caught sight of the small shapes that made up the village of Hayward, dark and resting peacefully in the distance. They would not have the time to stop there now, but as he led them south, he veered close enough to make sure that it had not been trampled over by the invaders. He let out a sigh of relief to see that it looked untouched. "Talgarth is following a stranger attack pattern than I thought. The pace of their retreat is quick to say the least. What could they be plotting?" Caleb had been to Hayward only a handful of times before, but the small, unremarkable village held meaning for him. The settlement was made up of several dozen stone houses and huts, with only a few mills and barns in between, to store and process the grains and corn that grew in the farms beyond on the other side of the village. It was in this humble setting that his father, Damon, had grown up, and where he had met his mother. It was from here that he had ventured out as a young man of 16, and started the legend that would become his famed life. Caleb had heard on multiple occasions how in his youth he had happened upon a clan of Gruuls that had somehow abducted a royal carriage coming north from Manon on the very highway they traveled now. He followed them with an old sword he had taken from the village elder's basement, and discovered that the carriage bore the niece of King Halus himself. He saved her from the ghouls, barely surviving with the skin on his back, and returned her to the castle. It was from there that his fame spread, and the village youth began his transformation from farmer to hero. Caleb frowned. What secrets would he discover if he could view the past of that village? If he could see his mother in her youth? If he could know the truth about her, jumbled within the vague tales his father told about her life and death? Caleb snapped out of his thoughts as Hayward passed them by. Layla brought Ollie up next to him as they rode on. "I'm sure your father is well," she said, reading him all too easily. "We will see him soon and he'll have good news for us." Rembrandt men seem to have a way of staying alive even while they dance in the middle of the fire. Caleb nodded and smiled at her. His churning thoughts of his father made him subconsciously spur Vector nearly to a run.
Thank you for listening. Subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss the next chapter. Episodes go live every Monday and Friday morning at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. The audiobook can be purchased in its entirety on Google Play Books. Get the whole trilogy now in both paperback and ebook formats. All links are in the description.